Shalom. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Tovah Goldfine. This is TMSRoundtable. We are live all over the world. Hi, Rosie.
Hi, Tovah. Good morning, Josh, as well.
Hey, hello to both of you.
This morning, or today, should I say, we have got Josh Jonas, and he counts himself in as the connoisseur of rage until he spends some time thinking about himself. Josh, welcome, and we're very, very happy to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with both of you.
Yeah. So tell us about how on earth you became the connoisseur of rage, because that's a lovely way. It sounds like a good whiskey to me.
Yes, or a really good band. So, I mean, to try to get to the point a little bit how that happened. So, I became familiar with TMS and everything. I think starting around the time when I was in early high school, and I started having a ton of really bad back and leg pain. And I went to, it's kind of the story that you hear with this over and over. I went to many, many different doctors and got basically little to no relief. And then this kind of went on for so long that I remember my father actually telling me about towards the end of high school, a lecture that he heard about from some guy called Sarno, who talks to people who are about to get back surgery, and when they leave this talk, they're cured. And I remember saying to my dad, that sounds like a cult. And so I then got into college, and the pain, it continued to get worse and worse and worse. And I was still going to a bunch of different doctors, and they were telling me what they thought it was, and I would still do what they told me to do, and I was still getting really little to no relief. And then I was also, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was also a huge fan of Howard Stern. And when Howard Stern's book came out, one of the people he dedicated it to was this guy that my father had mentioned in the lecture, Sarno. And I still remember in his dedication, he thanked Sarno for curing him of his back pain and OCD, by the way. And so I took note of that. And then very shortly after that, I had a bout of back and leg pain that was so bad that I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't move. It was that debilitating. And so it was sort of my end of my rope. I sort of went, all right, let me see what this guy is about. And I was in Boston, but I called him in New York, and they said I could come in, but that I needed to read his book first. And so I think at that time it was either Healing Back Pain or The Mind-Body Connection. And I read it, and it really was, I know I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but it really was like a religious experience. I saw myself on every page, and there was something so relieving about beginning to understand why all these other doctors that I had gone to, why there was no relief. It was just that was so relieving, that to understand why I couldn't get any relief from this pain. And so I went and saw Sarno, and he examined me, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with you." And he told me that I had this thing called TMS, which millions of people have. I went to the cult lecture. And then because my psychology was a little stubborn, I then did one of the groups that he didn't lead, but he had a psychologist who led one of the groups. And I did the group. I was like 22. So I was by far at that time, I was the youngest person. This was 20 something years ago. So I was the youngest person in that group. And then very shortly after I was able to reverse the pain. And so all these years later, me being a therapist, this work, it's not the only work that I do, but it's work I'm very passionate about, because all the other work that I like to do with people, if people are having this experience of experiencing intense pain where they feel the way I felt, which is kind of trapped in my body, you can't do any of the other work if you're so debilitated with pain. And so one of the things that really resonated with me, this is my long way around to answer your question, one of the ways that really resonated with me is that so much of chronic pain has to do with rage, and rage that we do not want to feel. And so the more that I could begin to sort of be okay with my rage and sort of team up with it, and the more that I could learn how to use it, it really began to bring profound relief for me. And so that's my long-winded way of saying how I became a connoisseur of RAID.
Josh, share with them the story of acting and how you had the script, I think, on your hand, and your colleague or your mentor said they're not your father. I loved that. I just loved that little talk that you gave there. It was just amazing. Josh actually lived that experience in a sort of in an acting way, and it really demonstrates, I suppose, the depth of the anger that a child has that he has no way of expressing it. And I put up that little song about "What About Me" on Facebook the other day, thinking about that little boy in the corner shop, what rage he would have had when everybody overlooked him. So, can you share the?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of my favorite quotes, I'm just thinking, is by Anais Nin, right? And she said, "We don't see things as they are; we see things as we are." And that's basically what the story was about. When I was younger, I was an actor. When I had a lot of this chronic pain stuff going on, and I like I said in the talk, one of the things that having a lot of anger can do is actually it gives you a motor. And so I wrote this play that got produced off Broadway, and it was directed by this man whose name is Larry Moss, who became a big mentor and friend of mine. And Larry is, even though he's an acting teacher and director, he's also one of the best therapists I've ever had. And in the middle of a rehearsal, we were just rehearsing this one part that like I said, I thought it was a kind of lighter, benign part. It wasn't anything that emotional. And he stopped me right in the middle of it, and he just said, "Josh, the audience is not your father." And it was one of these things that kind of just hit me in the side of my head, and I just kind of stood there, and he said it again. He said, "The audience is not your father." And it was so, and Larry has a habit of saying these things that you then have to go home and like think about for 9 hours because it's he's the most sort of bang for your buck in terms of he'll say something and then, okay, I got to go think about that now. And so he said this to me, and it was this big moment of realizing that even in he kind of went on to say to me, you're so angry at the audience. You're so angry at them. They want to love you. You're so angry at them. The audience is not your father. And I think you need to go talk to him. And so I listened to him, and I had this great talk with my dad. Not that we had never spoken before, but just had this talk with my dad about all of the pressure I'd been putting on myself. And he really, because he'd done his own work, he kind of really got it. He really understood it in a deep, profound way. And that understanding from him really released something in me. In terms of the pain, in terms of the physical pain that I had at the time. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, that's
wow.
Yes, please continue and tell us what your father did say, because that's the key to it all.
Yeah. So my father, I told him that I'm trying to remember now exactly. I said to him, I told him, Larry gave me this, this like Star Wars, the audience is not your father thing. And he said, oh yeah, he said, I get it. It makes sense. He said, because, I remember when you were a little kid, he said you around 5 years old, you'd come in and you'd say something and it would be kind of funny or witty. And I would think that you heard it somewhere else, and were parroting it back. And he said, and then it happened again and again, where you would come in and say something that's like a 5-year-old kid. And I have a 4-year-old for myself, so I know what that's like. Kid comes in and says something, you just go, wait, where did that come from? And I would say something that was kind of funny or witty, and he would again think that I had heard this and I was repeating it. And then he said that there was some moment we were all at dinner, and he couldn't remember what it was exactly, but we were all at dinner, and there was something that I said in response to something that was going on that made it obvious to him that that my sort of quickness or whatever was me. that it wasn't something I was repeating, but it was me. And he said, and then he let me know and he said, I really realized that it was about me, meaning him. And he said, I realized that that was really about me not thinking that I could have a smart son because of my feelings about me, meaning his feelings about him. And so that acknowledgement was really deep and profound for me, that he could let me, that he kind of gave me the missing piece in a way. It was, why, this thing of why was I always looking to be, loved or connected to or praised or admired? Why did I sort of hate the audience, right? The relationship with the audience is this love-hate. It's kind of, I need you to love me and I hate you that I need you to love me. It was like that kind of thing. And so he really helped illuminate that for me. It was a huge deal.
Yeah. And also, the other thing you mentioned was about you as a little child going to Florida, and how your mum must have had to drive, because as he was driving down from Boston or New York or wherever you were, down to Florida, which is probably a day's drive or 2 days' drive, he ended up being crippled. Can you share a little bit about that?
Wow, you really listened to the talk. I was saying one of the first, I have a very vivid memory of being around 5 years old and us driving to Florida, like you said, and my mom driving and my father being laid out in the back seat. And when I was 5 years old, I didn't comprehend what was going on. And so I loved it because I got to lie down in the back seat with him. And so I laid down, on the sort of where you put your feet, and I laid down there, and my dad was lying down in the back seat, and I just laid down there on this drive to Florida, and I just thought it was fantastic. And the reason that he was laid out was because he had such awful back pain going on. He couldn't move. And this sort of, I think what you're talking about, the interesting thing about that trip that I found out all these years later is that trip was us going to visit his father. And so there was a lot obviously going on with him. One of the things I have learned in terms of the work that I've done, and I'm the clinical director at the Village Institute, and it's the work that I try to teach people and also have people experience themselves, is that there's that old awful cliche that if you go to therapy, you learn to, you just learn to blame everything on your parents. And then you're all better. And one of the things that I've found is that really good therapy, I think, can actually help you learn to love your parents. And I don't mean this in any sort of cheesy cliche way, but the deeper work I ended up doing on me, you get to a point where you realize where it comes from. And then when you realize where it comes from, you go, oh, that means they had this too. That this is a pain that they were going through. And then you actually have some compassion for this person trying to do the best they could, but they were just in a lot of pain.
Josh, I'm gonna, I think that it's really amazing that it sounded like you had a healing with your father that was really an aha moment for you and helped you progress. A lot of people we work with, they don't have that kind of relationship with their parents, but it doesn't mean they can't get to that place. So maybe talk about, for a few minutes, about someone who doesn't have that kind of even rapport with their parent, or the parent is not alive, that they still can find that healing to love themselves and not blame themselves, and even be angry at them, and the ambiguity of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you chat on that?
Yeah. So that's such an awesome, important question, because there's, I was very fortunate to have that conversation with my dad. And there's so many people, I see a good handful of them who don't get to have that experience. And I don't want to butcher this, but there's a great idea in Stoic philosophy, and I don't want to butcher this, but this idea of you don't get to choose who you are you don't get to choose your parents, but you can choose who you are the child of. And this idea that, we're not our parents, but also we get to choose the people that we want to have as mentors. We get to choose the people who we want to, whose work we really admire, and has had a profound effect on us. So there are a lot. So all of this to say that you might not be able to have that experience with your parent, but you can have it with a therapist. You can have it with a mentor, and so much of the work to really reversing this pain. I've been working with someone recently like this. There's been no conversation. She had come from a lot of trauma and a very, very painful relationship with her mother and father, and she's really so much of her pain has gone away. And some of it relates to her parent, her mom and dad, but none of it's come from her speaking with them or addressing them. It's really come from the deep acknowledging of the really painful feelings that went on, the deep rage that can be caused, and then Tovah, like you said, having I'm sort of trying to put a lot in a little here, but then having the compassion for that rageful part of you.
Okay, can I interrupt for a moment and suggest that what you're saying is that you're repairing the original attachment in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating a repair between you and the patient in that moment. And the patient can begin to trust another human being. Where they couldn't trust their original carer, they can begin to trust. They have to open themselves up a little, and then once they do, they realise that they've got this profound feeling of love for the whole world, not just their parents. So that's sort of how I see it, I suppose. But,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that to me, and tell me if this makes sense, that to me is the very powerful first step. And to me, the next step is almost this thing sometimes I call it doing couples therapy with yourself. I
love it.
It can that having your therapist be able to say, being able to really trust the therapist and repair that attachment is huge. But then oftentimes what you find is that there is so much, we internalize mom and dad. And so there's so much rage at the part of us that feels rage. There's so much rage at the part of us that hurts. And so it's like that very, very important repairing of attachment, like you just said, Rose, then helps us hold our hand to then repair that connection that we have with ourselves in terms of the part of us that hurts and the part of us that feels.
Excellent.
Well, we'd call that guilt about the rage. So we become guilty because we love these people, but we can't find the love, and it's not reciprocated. So the guilt about the rage is massive then. So then that repair has to also incorporate that guilt so that they can see that there was nothing to be guilty about.
Yeah.
That it was just that little boy, that was ignored, or a little girl or whatever. Yeah. Josh, tell us a little bit about the work you do
We have
now.
a question, Rose. I'm just going to interrupt you in a minute. We have a question. Patty came on from, I know she's from, I think, New York. She's a friend of Michael Galinsky's. And she asked a question, and it's interesting because I don't really know what this is. On this table is some psychologist expertise. But have you heard of AEDP therapy? Do you think this would help TMSers? Have you heard of that, Josh?
Can I answer that?
There's so many things with so many initials now. I don't know. I haven't heard of it. If they can describe
what it is, Rose?
Idea, I might be able to.
Yeah. It's a form of intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. It's part of the EDT group.
Okay.
So it's similar to what I do.
Yeah. Listen, I
they,
think that anything.
the difference is that they're into shame, whereas I tend to not ask about shame because I see it as a defense.
Yeah.
But with AEDP, they include the feeling of shame.
Right.
Whereas with ISTDP, we look at what comes up and what's going to be blocked down by anxiety. So we don't include shame. And I'd rather go to guilt.
Uh-huh.
Could I add something? Did you say you said it was short term?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just want to say to anyone who's battling with chronic pain, be wary of yourself when you're looking to do something that's short term. Because so much of the character structure of people who suffer from chronic pain is a kind of perfectionist, a kind of, I have to get this done and get it done as quickly as possible, and I have to get it right. So something where you're entering into short term, I'm not saying it can't happen. I've worked with...
Josh, short term is something like 40 visits.
Okay. Never mind. Okay.
Because if you go to psychoanalysis, it's 10 years.
Yes. Well, no, psychoanalysis, 5 years is short term.
Oh, well.
Right. Patty called it accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I think it's important to maybe tell our listeners that when I say to people it's a journey and we use that term, you're right. I don't want people to have the expectations it's going to go away, because it's not like it's black or white. It's a journey. And I mean, we all have TMS. It just when it gets chronic, it's a problem. And when it runs our life, it's a problem. Absolutely. Otherwise, we'll have back pain, we'll have hives, like, remember Michael Galinsky and I we're comparing our hives, and I was so happy I had him on my legs and he had him on his face. And I was thanking God for not, so it's part of life. It's part of our body reacting to our life. And I think what we're learning in these therapies and what we're teaching is just how to understand yourself, how to know yourself. So we have another question from Patty that I wanted to address. Hold on. It was up here in the beginning. And I hope that she gets some answers from you. Did you have back pain, Josh, and then experience nerve pain and then anxiety? Did you have the whole pain cycle? She wanted to know.
So, okay, great question. So, this is where we get a little into wonky into TMS world, because, nerve pain is, I want to know I would just want to know what she means exactly by nerve pain. I know part of what happens with TMS is that it can exhibit a lot of neurological symptoms like muscle weakness, muscle, tingling, numbness, muscle weakness. So, if we're calling, so I just want to know what she means by that when she says nerve pain. I definitely had muscle weakness, which some people would say is a neurological symptom. There were times where I couldn't put any pressure on my leg, basically without needing to fall. It was that bad. So there was that. I didn't really experience anxiety. I just, like you said, we all deal with this in different ways. For whatever reason, anxiety is just not my thing. But I do think I also explain to people sometimes that pain has two components. There's the pain component and the misery component. And it's one of the ways that I can tell TMS pain versus just regular kind of pain is when I just have just an injury or something, I can experience a lot of pain with no misery, as opposed to I used to experience a ton of pain and a ton of misery. So when it would be really chronic and really bad and I felt really stuck in it, I wouldn't experience anxiety, but I would experience a lot of misery. So, yeah.
Do you think that it was to block the anxiety that you had the pain? Have you thought about it that way?
No, I didn't. To me, anxiety again, anxiety in a way has a lot of the properties, we could get very sort of theoretical here, but to me, anxiety has a lot of the properties of TMS stuff, and that I think there's a lot under the anxiety. And so to me,
yeah, anxiety, holds it down.
Yeah, and so to me, it never was about anxiety. To me, it was about anger, rage, and even a kind of sort of sadness that can come out of rage. If that makes sense.
Do you think also helplessness and sort of hopelessness comes out of it?
Say that again?
When you have chronic pain, that helplessness comes out and that hopeless feeling. It's never going to get better.
Absolutely. I mean, again,
there's no hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes. I mean, it's why I'm so passionate about doing this work. I don't know if I say this before or after, but like I was saying to you guys before, it's not. This isn't the only work that I do, but this is some of the work I'm so passionate about, because all the other stuff I would like to do with people, I can't do if we are stuck in our bodies with pain. And if you go to doctor, and they say, and you can't get any relief, you end up feeling incredibly hopeless, incredibly helpless, and just like, this is never going to go away, which really is it's a maddening feeling. It's maddening. It's really, I really have such compassion for people that experience that, because I know what that is like.
Yeah, look, I'd like you to also share with us a little bit about what you do now, because you have men's groups, you have a lot of work that you do, and you've motivated a lot of people. Would you share that also? Because coming out of that pain, coming out of that acknowledgement of Sino, has given you a whole broad spectrum of how to care for others. And would you share that a little bit for us too? And also you teach other therapists, I believe, as well.
Sure. And and let me know if I'm missing anything, but I'm the clinical director and co-owner of this place called the Village Institute here in New York City, though we're not obviously going into the offices right now. And it's myself and about 7 other therapists, and I train. They're trained by me, and they're all fantastic. And like you said, we run groups. I was running a men's group up until COVID time, and then we had to put that on hold. And then I see a lot of people individually, and I see couples, and I think that again, to try to answer your question, I think that the discovering of Sarna was the beginning of me really realizing that basically the majority, 90 whatever percent of our growth comes out of pain. And it's actually, I think the more that we can actually begin to, and I don't mean in the masochistic kind of poor me way, but I mean the more that we can really begin to get interested in our own individual pain, the things that really give us a hard time, the things that feel like blocks in our life. I mean, that's really where all of our growth comes out of. And so a lot of the work that I do is to try to help people grow in that way out of their pain. I mean, all the areas that I'm super passionate about, whether it's chronic pain, working with men, couples, all of it is because these are things that I've experienced pain in, and I'm very passionate about. That's where the passion comes out of, and then I love to try to teach people in that vein. So,
yeah.
I have a question. I'm going to talk about something. 1 second. I'm going to talk about something a little serious that I think is a really good point. And Rose and I have talked about this, and we really want to help people with this particular thing. I will just say hello to Gail, who's making some really good comments. She says, on top of the guilt that one carries, guilt of not being the best version of oneself for self or others. So I think you're very smart, Gail. You say a lot of very smart things. So what I wanted to say, I was talking to a doctor tonight, a fellow doctor who wants to start with some pain work in Israel. We're thinking of maybe bringing curable here to Israel and trying to educate our community here. But she mentioned something, and I just realized it's across the board what we see this as therapists, and it's sad, but we have to face it, and it's not a pretty truth. But I would like you and Rose to both mention something about your feelings on when so many people have the pain because it works for them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't give up the pain because it's working for them, and it's painful to say that, but it is the truth, and it could be freeing at the same time. What do you think about that, Rose?
Well, that's what patients say themselves. It saved them having to interact with people. It allowed them to stay home without having to endure difficult responsibilities. There's a whole lot of ways that it can be your friend. But also it was your friend when you were mad. Like Josh's story is so perfect. Like he's absolutely mad with his dad, who belittles him at the table. But he can't tell the dad that he's furious. So the pain, the tummy pain that he would have got, would have excused him from the table, and maybe his mother might have been empathetic when he had the pain. So he got genuine attention instead of for his wit and his vocabulary. He got attention for his pain. So it's a benefit, a weird benefit, but it's true. Yeah, you can imagine the 5-year-old, like being told, "Oh, well, where did you get that from?" And then, a little while later, the tummy pain comes up, and mother takes him to bed and says, "Oh, I'll give you some, I don't know, Panadol or whatever it is for the pain." He's getting attention in a helpless way, in actual fact. And then we come out as adults, and we, have social anxiety. Because who's going to criticize us? And Josh sort of having that acting moment where the audience was his father is just so absolutely, it's just so spot on. Yeah.
Right. What do you think, Josh, about that?
I think it's, Tovah, I think it's a very important topic, and I think it's not touchy, but that I just tend to not think really anything's touchy, but it's complicated because in a way, and I don't like getting too shrinky, but it's kind of, we want to diagnose between the difference between primary and secondary gain. Mm-hmm. And just in that, because I think for a lot of doctors will use secondary gain as the reason the patient's not getting better, right? So they'll say, "Yeah, this is what's going on with you. You have a herniated disc. This is what's going on, and I've diagnosed you correctly, and I'm treating you correctly. And the reason you're not getting better is because of secondary gain. That in some way it's working for you, right? When in actuality, in a lot of the cases, it's not secondary gain. They just haven't been diagnosed properly. And if they could be diagnosed with TMS, the pain could then go away, right? There are then those, I think, where they will." If something like only 10 to 20% of people accept the TMS diagnosis, there are then those who will completely reject that diagnosis, and it makes them angry, it gets them pissed off, which I understand too. I think then in that way it may be, as you said, sort of working for them in a way. It's a tough conversation, but yes, there are people who, as painful as it is, it allows them to finally take a break. It allows them to have a real reason to not keep going, So it's an important topic because there's there's reason for all of it, and what's important is figuring out really what the reason is.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and
as you
Josh,
say, the secondary gain.
I know the
is a relief.
Oh yes. I know that some of the listeners have had some, pain from a doctor's mistake and different things that might be genetic or physical, God forbid, cancer. But I am convinced and I'll put my word of honor on this. After all my years of experience and my own mother having MS, and people can get chronic pain is not normal. Disease is not normal. Healing is normal. People say the body, you have a birthright. We have a birthright to be healthy. And the body has an incredible innate ability to heal over and over and over again. The minute you bleed, the body begins to heal. The minute my hair comes out, the hair begins to grow. The body is wired that way. And we're not even going to get into rewiring and epigenetics. We're just going to say chronic pain is not normal. I'm not blaming anybody out there, but people can get better. And these are not spontaneous healing. The body can heal, and the mind is the conductor. And I believe that. And I really.
Yeah. So I'm with you on this. I think I want to get his name right. There's more and more. I have so many thoughts. There's more and more research and studies coming out to show that what you're saying is just true. That so much, and then also, there are things that are not caused by TMS, but can be exacerbated. A lot of autoimmune stuff isn't necessarily caused, but can get kicked up by it, which is a whole other, demographic or something. But the part that I think is, again, it is tough. Is I really know that this is a tough sell for a lot of people. The idea of just speaking, I think it's important to always say that injuries happen. We're not superhero. Injuries happen. We do get sick. There are things that happen in the span of a lifetime that are going to happen. And I always want to make sure that, I like to say, I don't want to sound like a vegan trying to hawk tofu therapy. I always want to, maintain credibility. So I understand what it sounds like as a therapist going, oh yeah, it's your feelings. Oh yeah, it's your feelings. Oh yeah, it's your feelings. I don't want to be that guy. And so I think it's always important to in fact, when I'm working with someone in a TMS way, one of the first things I'll do is I will say, first go rule everything out. Go see a doctor, go get examined, make sure that because we want to be able to buy in. And I want them to know that I do believe you can run and pull a hamstring. You know what I mean? You can injure something, but like you were talking about chronic pain where things grow and grow and grow and grow exponentially and do not heal. Especially when there's no sort of inciting incident. That's not the way the body works. That's not the way injuries happen. And so in that way, yeah, there's we do have the ability to as Howard Schubiner, who's the body mind guy in Michigan, he likes to say, call it reversing the pain, because he says, it all hangs out in the brain. And so that we do have the ability to reverse this pain. Absolutely.
Good way to put it.
Yeah.
Good way to put it.
Yeah. Have we got any more
I've never met.
on the side, Tovah?
Yeah, I've never met Liam. Is he Liam Doherty? Nice to meet you. I had made a comment about. Gail had mentioned that. How could she? She wants to get rid of the pain. She wants it out of her life. She wants to get on with her life. And so I had mentioned sometimes it's unconscious that we're holding on to the pain. Sometimes it's unconscious. It's not blaming anybody. So Liam mentioned,
it's
indeed,
never
I
conscious.
think
It's unconscious.
Yes, you're right. Liam said, indeed, I think there is a vast contrast between conscious and unconscious gains.
True.
Want to comment on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's why I use that scenario of the child getting the uncovered gain would be that someone listened to them and became empathetic. The criticism that they endured was then they covered it by being helpless in a way. And, you know, the abdo pain, the stomach pain maybe, or the headache, whatever the child would have had, then created empathy for them. So there's an unconscious belief that I can get, if I am unwell, someone's going to be empathetic towards me. But unfortunately, in adult life, it's probably more likely the opposite.
Right.
That people then put you aside because you're the person with all the pain. It's just a proposition. What do you think?
You know, and so I know Josh was mentioning, and I know Rose talks about this a lot. You were sort of holding back and mentioning about feelings as if people get. What do you mean? Is that what you were saying, Josh? I didn't understand. You sort of don't.
I'm sorry, which part?
You were saying something about you don't talk about feelings, or you don't mention it because the patients get insulted, or what were you? What point were you making?
Not that I don't mention it. Just that I want to make. If this is what you're talking about. No, not that I don't mention it at all. Just that that I know that this is this idea can be a tough sell for a lot of people. The idea that because you know, again, I think I'm fortunate that I'm just kind of shrinky by nature. So I read Sarno's book and I read the psychology, and it just made sense to me. It just sounded like me, right? But there are a lot of people where when you say this to them, what they hear you saying is it's all in your head, right? Which to someone who is experiencing a ton of chronic pain, that can feel
it's so cruel, isn't it?
Yeah, so dismissive
and cruel.
I just always want to be aware that what I'm saying is gonna, for some people, be a tough sell. It's not that they're not just going to be on board with this as the thing that's causing me. That's all.
Okay, so let's have a role play with the real patient. Gail, this is Gail's comment, and I want you to answer her. Gail says she's an artist. She wants to exhibit, have a thriving business. She used to be an athlete, a traveler, and how is this pain benefiting her? She would do anything to get well, even a little better. And I know that she had an injury from a doctor, and you know, my first reaction is like, how angry you must be, Gail, to have a doctor do something to make a mistake. But let's say she's dealt with her anger. Let's just how would you handle, Gail, from just this question? What would be something you would say to her?
So me?
Yeah.
So
you, Josh.
Want to exhibit how it's thriving business. Well, this is a great example of someone where I don't believe it's secondary gain. I don't believe it's benefiting her in terms of unconsciously she wants people to help her or wants people to take care of her. This doesn't feel. I mean, again, it's always a little difficult just somebody typing and talking, but this is a classic example of someone. This is not, to me, this doesn't feel like secondary gain. This is someone. And again, I don't know how familiar they are with TMS and you know what
she knows a lot about it. It was a 20 years ago. It was a surgery, and she can never sit again from something that happened in a surgery. The doctor made a mistake. Say that's all the information you have. What would you say?
Okay, so my first question would be, you know, has she, again, there are, you know, I don't want to go beyond my limits, right? So there are, I mean, I don't know exactly what went down on the operating table. So if this was someone coming into my office, the first thing I would say is, could we have you go be seen by someone who understands TMS, and can we rule out if there is in fact something structural going on, right? So she might then go, and if she were to come back and go, they told me this is a structural thing. I had an operation 20 years ago. And this is kind of where I'm at, then it's not.
No, the doctor made a mistake. The doctor made a mistake. Number one, she said she's not mad at the doctor. which I don't believe. I can't imagine you can forgive the doctor. You just have to be, And she says I don't ever ask for help, which that's a cue. And she had some nerve damage from surgery. And I know that she's been, visiting us often, and I know she's struggling.
Yeah. So to me, so like I said, again, I would first need to know if she could are you saying that we're ruling out that there is something structural, or we don't know? Because whether there is something
nerve damage from some surgery.
But has she gone, I would ask her, has Gail gone to someone like there's the Rusk Institute in New York, a Howard Schumer, has she gone to someone who works in this way, who could take a look and say, what you're experiencing actually does not come from what you're talking about? I mean, that's always the first step, because we need the person to buy in. So I would want her to go get looked at by someone, who understands the connection between the mind and the body. Like those are just two examples. And if they said, actually, I don't see anything that wrong with you. She's saying yes, structural. So, I mean, again, if it's structural, then it's structural. If it's the kind of thing where, I'd also want to know more about the pain. Does it ever go away? Does it flare up? Does it come from anything? I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think that it would actually have to do with rage at the doctor. What it could be, I mean, if we're gonna again, this is someone I don't know. So if we're gonna suppose that it is TMS, right? We're gonna suppose that it is TMS. Then I don't actually think it's rage. I don't think it would be rage at the doctor, and I think it would be it would be a classic example of how we can have something very concrete, like an operation, like a car accident, like a skiing injury, something that happens where we say, ever since this has been going on, right? That happens all the time. For me, when I was younger, it was carrying a file cabinet that was really heavy, and I felt something. And then from then on, there was this pain. So I hope this is making sense. So if it is in fact TMS, that's kind of where I would begin with,
Well, what I want to say to Gail, and maybe you can comment on this, is that, and what I want to say to Rosie, being in the field for all these years, you could have something structural that can affect your life, but to have pain 24/7, to not be able to function in the way that she describes, there has to be some emotional. She says that she wishes it were TMS. So my feeling is not to give up hope, to continue knowing yourself, to continue understanding the feelings. I mean, if you're so clear on what's going on, it's almost like, help me here, Rose.
Well, it's about fear. So TMS has many, many aspects. And if you look at the anxiety pathways, it gives you clarity. So that fight and flight is in operation all the time for her. And it sounds like it's the freeze mechanism that's sort of coming in the vasovagal system. So what I would sort of see is more like the pain may not go away, but the coping mechanism for the pain is what's important.
Right.
Now, I've seen cancer patients in a lot of pain, but they're calm about the pain. But when you've got fear around the pain, then it makes it worse. So the pain may never go away, but coping with the fear will help reduce. You say to a patient, well, on the scale of 1 to 10, where's your pain? And they'll say 99.9, and you can say to them, well, what else is going on for you? And then all of a sudden, they'll tell you that, they've got their children at home, or there's no one looking after them, or their mother just died. And then you'll see why the pain is much worse.
And the other thing I want to add here is I think this is a really good example of where like I was saying before, where I don't want to just, I don't want to be that therapist that says everything is TMS, right? Number one. But also, even though she's saying, yes, there's something structural, the point that I was trying to make before is that there are many examples of people who have structural abnormalities, things that are wrong with them, and they exhibit no pain. So just because there's something structurally wrong doesn't mean there should be pain. What I was saying, and this is again someone I would need to work more closely with than just in the way that we're doing this now, but I would ask that they, not just that they go to a doctor and say, do you see something structurally wrong? I would want them to go to someone who understands TMS and could say yes or no, the pain you're experiencing makes sense based on what I'm looking at. If you go to a doctor who understands TMS and they say, but from what I'm looking at, the pain you're experiencing actually makes sense, then that's one road of treatment. If they look at it and they say, I see that there's something structurally wrong, but that doesn't mean you should be having this pain, then we can go to the TMS work. And then the TMS work would become, like you said, she's someone who never asked for help. Now we would start to get into what I believe is underneath it all, which is rage. And like I was explaining to the two of you before, this thing that I call rage that will cost us. Part of the reason I don't think it's rage at the doctor is somebody that you don't know anymore, that you have no relationship with. It's very easy to be rageful at. It's very easy to go, F that doctor who screwed me up, But rage that will cost us, having to do with the most important relationships in our life, that's very difficult. Especially if we grew up in a certain way, especially if we grew up around anger, or if we grew up in an environment where we were not allowed to cause any tension at all. There's lots of different ways in which we can grow up where just the feeling, not the act, just having the feeling feels very dangerous, very threatening in a deeply existential way. And so that would be the work that I would do with someone like this if we could sign off on the pain that you're experiencing doesn't make sense based on what we're looking at structurally.
Also, the stuff that's going on in the background, even if it's structural, even if the pain is a structural pain, the fear that's around that is profound. And that's the area that you can work in to allow the person to actually recognize, yes, I have pain, but it's not going to kill me, or I'm going to survive it, or whatever, just to allow them to have that other space rather than only thinking about the pain. And Dr. Alan Abbas will probably talk about that in the very near future, how that happens.
I want to mention too, it was a really good point what you made, Rose, and so I wanted to comment on, first of all, how excited I am about Dr. Alan Abbas coming to speak in a few weeks. But there's two very simple incidents that will interest our viewers, that we can understand sometimes the crime doesn't fit the punishment, and that our brain is creating the pain, and it doesn't make sense. But I think the education and the knowledge part of the Sarno work is for us to understand our bodies, to own and understand what's going on in our brain. You don't have to be a doctor to do this. I always say, you're the doctor, I'm just the messenger. But there's two incidents that come to my mind that will fascinate the listeners. One is, this typical thing where the guy gets a nail in his foot, in his boot, and he's screaming in pain, screaming, hysterical in pain, and they, he's in a construction site, and they lay him down and they give him something, and he's screaming in pain, and nothing works. The ambulance comes, gives him a shot. He's screaming in pain, and they take him to the hospital and they cut off his boot. It's between his toes, the nail's between his toes. So we look at the fear. And the other thing, which I'm hoping to have this director on our show, he wrote a movie called Cut the Pain, And it's about an Israeli soldier who was in a tank, and he was shell shocked, and he wasn't hurt, but he was shocked. He came out of the army. He had such horrible, horrible leg pain, excruciating. He couldn't live with it. He was in a wheelchair. He wasn't walking. He had no life. He begged his parents. He begged his doctor to cut off the leg. And he cut off his leg, and the pain didn't go away. I mean, that's the intensity of what our brain can do. And so if our brain can do that, then our brain can undo it. This is my point, to make those two stories. Like, we're intense, passionate human beings. So I know I want to comment, Rose. I need your help with that one too, because what do you say about that?
I don't know. What am I going to say?
You always have an answer
No
for
one
me,
recognized his grief. No one recognized his grief.
Right.
Wouldn't that be more to the point? That
Right.
when he did go to the doctor, and no one spent time with him about what was going on inside him and in his thoughts. I mean, our thoughts. You were just saying about the body heals itself, but the body can heal itself through your thoughts. It hurts you through your thoughts, and you can heal it through your thoughts. It seems a very cruel thing to take a person's leg off for pain without finding out what else is going on for them. And that's one of the tragic things about medicine, that no one takes into account the doctor's anxiety about what's going on. Patients go to the doctor as though they're God. But the thing is that the doctor themselves are anxious about what's going on. And they don't recognize their own anxiety, and then they put it back over onto the patient. So, anyway.
Excellent.
That's
response.
an extreme example of,
yeah. But what do you think about that, Josh, about, the extreme pain that our brain, I mean, it's so real. How do you say to a person, your pain is real, but it's in your brain? It's unbelievable mechanism.
So absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about, I mentioned Howard Schubiner before. He has a line where he says, it's not in your head, but it is in your brain. And so, it's, and I don't mean this, but, it's, what you're saying, I completely agree with, and the tough work is, in a way we're all we're preaching to the choir here. We believe this very deeply, and the difficult work is, again, it's not like I get a kickback every time somebody understands that their pain has a feeling component to it. I'm just saying that the tough work is when someone is in such debilitating pain. The tough work is to get them, and that's why I often use the term psychophysical, right? Because psychosomatic has the connotation that you're effed up and it's all in your head, whereas psychophysical is understanding that this is very real pain that we're talking about. It's very real pain. Yeah. The only difference is that the cause is not structural, and so I just think it's always very important to let people know. I am not minimizing your pain. I'm not saying this is in your head. I'm not saying that you're some sort of, Freudian, hysteric. None of that. I'm only saying that the very real pain that you are experiencing is not caused by something structural. That's it. Because I think it's really important that people understand. I think part of my sort of mentor as a therapist was always saying to me when I started treatment, he loved the movie Analyze This for one scene in that movie where Billy Crystal is the therapist, and every time he would get very shrinky, De Niro would go, speak English. And so the therapist who really trained me would always say, I don't care how profound the ideas are that we're talking about. speak English, speak English, speak English. And so I think in the spirit of that, when we do this work, we don't want to come off as, the therapist. I bristle at the therapist that hangs out in the rarefied air. Some people dig that. It just doesn't work for me. And so I think it's very important that they really get that we understand the reality of their pain. And then we can kind of work and move forward.
So true. So true.
Josh, before we finish, I introduced you as a connoisseur of rage. And, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about symptoms, and we haven't spent very much time talking about the cause of the symptoms. Do you know what I mean? Like that rage underneath, we haven't sort of talked about that. And I just want to know if you could sort of add a little bit about how rage helps the pain get worse, I suppose, really, until we recognize where the rage needs to go.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Remember with your father and the example of your father, the audience not being your father, and that rage that was within you that became resolved. Can we sort of explore that a little bit more? Because every person has all these medical symptoms, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor's anxiety isn't recognized within their symptoms, so they come out with a whole lot of diagnoses that are not anything about being angry, disappointed, or any of the other guilt or love or sadness or fear. None of that is recognized, only the stenosis or whatever they're going to be diagnosed with. Whereas your picture of standing in doing your rehearsal and your, what was his name, Martin, saying to you,
Larry,
can we sort of go into that space a little bit more so the audience can get to actually feel their own space? Gail was saying that she doesn't have anger anymore, but anger is something that we need to have, and it becomes a sort of like if we don't have it, well, we're not fully able to express what's going on for us.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So you were breaking up a little bit there. But I think I got your question. So to try to help explain a little bit, I explain it by, Freudians would call it the id. Other people would call it, inner child work. But I just ask people to think of basically any 1-year-old that they know, right? Any 1-year-old that is completely narcissistic, completely dependent, and completely pleasure-seeking. That is what a 1-year-old is. And we all have that part of us still inside, the part of us that has everything focused around us, everything, and we just, like I said, narcissistic, pleasure-seeking, and dependent. And that part lives in us, and it's our job to take care of that part of us, not let it run the show, and also not ignore it. And so when something goes against the grain of that part of us, rage can happen. And then on top of that, when we are the kind of person now consciously who has to be very good, has to be very perfect, is not allowed to get angry, is not allowed to get angry at, and here's the thing, and sometimes the not allowed to get angry in a certain sense can be very real, right? If somebody has a spouse where every time they get angry, the spouse says, "I'm not talking to you for the next week," you go, "I'm not allowed to get angry." So these things can be very real. And so then what happens is you have a situation now where you mentioned Gail. So again, I don't know all I know about Gail other than the structural thing is that she said she grew up, she's not allowed to ask for help, and she grew up around anger. So just quickly in what you're talking about, what that could mean, for example, is when we grow up, we all need help. We're all born with needs.
Helplessness.
The first three words we learn are basically mommy, daddy, more. So we are born with a ton of needs. And if we grow up around anger, that starts to reverse our wiring, in that we actually learn to not ask for help because it's dangerous. That need for help doesn't go away; it goes underground. And as we grow up, we might even take it on as a badge of honor. I don't need help. I don't need people's help. I've done everything by myself. I'm proud of that fact. Strong people are autonomous. Weak people need other people. And Sue Johnson, who's a brilliant couples therapist, said there's no such thing as autonomy. There's just healthy and unhealthy attachment. So in that way, I would start to talk to someone like Gail about, where that idea of not being able to ask for help comes from. What somewhere along the line, that very normal, natural instinct of needing help was cut off. That's good. That cutting off is going to be some kind of trauma. If there was a lot of anger in the house, that means that you didn't want to get angry, number one, or number two. What it also means is that you then also got very proud about the fact that you didn't, quote unquote, have any anger in you. You lived your life as, I don't want to be like the people I grew up around. I don't want to be like the people who were very angry. I'm not angry. And then again, it doesn't, when you put your finger in a hose, the water doesn't go away. It's. I hope I'm answering your question, but that's the way in which chronic pain then comes up, because then the pain comes up to distract you from that rage that you do not want to feel, because it is too threatening, it's too dangerous, it's too scary. And so we then organize our life completely around that pain, because we then never have to have those very rageful feelings that are underneath everything happening all the time.
Well said.
Wow.
Thanks, Josh. You've really encapsulated the whole story. Yeah.
So if we were to summarize,
and
maybe I always like to. Rose is always on one end of the birth canal, and I'm on the other end of the birth canal. Rose wants to know where it came from, and I'm always like, let's fix it.
Right.
So, this is what Rose and I make a good balance. And also, I want to make sure that the audience understands when we talk about angers, it's good to have. It's about balance. It's just about balance. I mean, moderation and balance, not extreme. But if there were some take-home tools, one or two that you put out we've had a consistent number of people watching us, a few people asking questions, but a consistent number of people the whole hour and 10 minutes. What would be some take-home tools, Corona candy? What would be some good take-home tools that not fast food fix it? It's not fast food, but there are things we can begin to implement into our life. So I wanted Rose to comment on that, and then Josh. Rose, some take-home.
What would I implement on my life? Just being aware. That's all I'd ask.
Awareness.
No more than that.
Yeah.
I sort of see that a lot of the tools are being, people are using them to punish themselves. So just being aware of when you punish yourself for something you didn't do, just for being angry about not being noticed. And that's why I love that song, What About Me? Little boy in the candy shop and no one notices him. Or if they do notice him, it's in a cruel way. Yeah.
So people are doing that to themselves, that exact interaction. Wow.
Yeah.
Josh, what little take home some people can implement immediately into their life? And
sure. It's someone, I guess if someone is bought into the idea that what they're experiencing is TMS, I would begin with, in a kind of delicate way. I mean, you wanted tools, so I'll give you, in a delicate way, I would take, 20 minutes at some point during the day, in the morning and the evening. I'd take 20 minutes by yourself and just start thinking about all of the places in your life where you might be angry, where your anger might feel very inconvenient. This is what I mean when I say it's about rage that will cost us. The places in your life where there might be a lot of anger and you don't want it to be there because it really is going to get in the way. So it tends to be, like I said, a spouse, a parent, a child, a job. Those are the places where we have a lot of feelings that we don't want to feel. And so the first part would be allowing yourself to have those feelings and to explore them. I mean, a lot of people don't realize really what's down there. And then the second part would be to, I really don't want to sound trite here, but to then, this is what I meant before when I said couples therapy with yourself, be compassionate to the part of you that has those feelings. It's one thing to be aware of the feelings that you have and then go, come on, get over it. Come on, you're angry. I get it. It's another thing to be a good parent to that part of you and to just be able to allow it. No one's ever died from feeling their feelings. So, so that's kind of, that would be my take on it.
Yeah. That's well said. Yeah. To be compassionate about your feeling of being.
Yeah.
Because anger is justified many times. So, yeah. Sorry, Tovah.
No, it's amazing because I grew up and went to lots of different kinds of therapists, and I don't remember anybody telling me to be compassionate. It's so profound that, and I don't want it, just like what you said, Josh, I don't want to downplay it at all, but it's another topic. It's another whole TMS roundtable to talk about how come it's so hard to self-accept? How come it's so hard to be compassionate to myself?
Can I give you a quick thing with that is because I think from what I've seen with a lot of people who experience TMS, they're actually very hardcore, high achieving people. And there's been, I think compassion has had an awful PR person. And I think a lot of people conflate compassion with pity. And they don't, they think that if I'm going to be compassionate, what you're saying is I have to pity myself. And I hope this is her. Krista Tippett gave a great talk on compassion, and she said it is not pity. It's active kindness. It's an active thing. Compassion can be a verb. It's something to do. An active kindness in an active way, and pity plays no part in that. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult. It's even especially for men, because it feels like there's a lot of pity involved in it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well,
excellent.
I think our subject with men is very important because women have, little girls have a hard time, but boys are being told to grow up. And I find it very, very painful when I have men sitting with me and they don't want to admit that they're hurt. And,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
that they're hurt underneath the pain. The hurt is in the heart, not in the body. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Josh,
So true.
thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also be wonderful if after the show, maybe since it's daytime in New York or Vermont, if you see any on the feed, any questions from, if anybody out there wants to ask Josh any questions, he'll answer from our feed. And I just appreciate you left some very good points. I mean, sometimes you can just color something in such a way. I mean, compassion is not self-pity. It's active kindness. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Very, very much.
Thank you.
It's tied up with empathy.
Yeah. Rose, I hate to say goodbye. Rose, I just love hanging out with you.
Could I just mention that I'll be on the computer? So if there are any questions that anyone wants to ask,
good.
I'll be on the computer all morning here.
Right.
And I'm very happy to answer any questions or make any contact that anyone wants to make. And thank you all for being part of TMS
Yeah.
Roundtable.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Josh. Have a great day, Rose.
Thank you.
Take good care. See you next
you.
week.
Okay, bye.
TMS
Bye.
Roundtable.
Bye.
Bye, guys.